continue to file applications that really confirm their commitment to preserving portions of the property, and as you'll see later this year, redeveloping its urban edges along Columbia Pike, George Mason, and 4 Mile Run Drive. So a lot of moving pieces, but we hope some of these slides help kind of organize those for you before we get to the recommendations. Also, maybe as a primer for the slides that are coming forward, it's important to remind everyone of the multimodal transportation network. Just on that property alone, 62 acres is pretty significant. And some of the things that had to occur in the first half of last year was to really reconsider how that balancing act of preserving and redeveloping might impact the street network, and how, in accommodating all of that, we could still achieve the planned bicycle facilities that needed to traverse that site from east to west. So this gives you a sense of where we ended up back in July and what we've been doing since to make all of those reality. So this involves a lot of community engagement. We wanted to make sure the right folks were at the table. And as you'll see in a minute, a lot of stakeholders had a chance to weigh in on those objectives. In the first half of the year, what we tried to do is really just update the vision for the property. And then in the second half of the year, begin to implement that, because once it lives in our policy documents, it also needs to live in our zoning ordinance. So a lot of the changes that you'll see tonight are really the more detailed elements of what we brought forward in July at a much more granular level. And to do that, we've been working throughout the fall with the property owner, with many of the stakeholders that were involved in updating the vision in the first half of the year. And you can see here some of the gradual steps we took to develop that guidance, refine some of the language, the maps, and the exhibits, and ultimately arrive at the public hearings that are happening this month. And then lastly, I also wanted to mention just the many different perspectives that were involved in developing this information, not just from a staff perspective, where we've had 3 different departments helping us generate these materials, but also from the community with various commissions, civic associations, and also other organizations helping us think about this more broadly and more comprehensively. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand things over to my colleagues in DES to discuss some of the elements that we are proposing for updates to help realize Barcroft's updated vision.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Culkins, DES Transportation Planning, and I'm going to walk us through some of the transportation plan changes that we're recommending. So the first map that we'll be sharing is the MTP map. We're planning on adding a number of local streets to the map and removing a few of them due to the different topographic changes and challenges on the site, as well as the development that we anticipate will be coming. One of the bigger changes from the existing recommendations to our proposed changes to the map is the removal of 11th Street from the plan. So we talked about in June and July, that street is no longer implementable due to the townhouse development that happened previously. So we're really looking at 12th Street as kind of that main east-west connective corridor through the site, parallel to Columbia Pike. We're also removing a few of the internal streets that don't provide connectivity anymore without 11th, as well as extending South Taylor to 12th Street. We're also going to be modifying the bike map of the master transportation plan to add recommended bike lanes on 12th, as well as on South Wakefield Street and a portion of South 4 Mile Run Drive to make sure that we are accommodating bikes and planning for them throughout the site. These changes can be seen on the subsequent maps, where we've got some a little detail about where and how all of these changes are happening. Rob will share a little bit more detail on what these will look like, or what we're planning for them to look like in the form-based code. But right now we're planning on changing 12th Street to be kind of the main east-west connectivity for not just vehicles and pedestrians, but planning bike facilities along them as well. And in order to achieve this vision, we're hoping for modifications to the GLEP, the MTP Streets Network, as well as the bike and trail map. And then Rob's going to talk in a little bit of more detail for the neighborhood form-based code and what those cross sections for these streets will look like.
Good evening, Robert Gibson from Arlington County DES Development Services. So there are three elements of the neighborhoods form-based code plan that are going to be updated in this. First, the overall regulating maps and plan map. Additionally, supporting street space cross sections, and then associated text within the body of the code itself. And there are also corresponding edits to the commercial code, because portions of the commercial code have been removed and placed into the neighborhoods code, making Barcroft one unified planning area. Next. And so as we talk about it, one of the challenges that we found was that in the current neighborhoods form-based code, there are only 3 existing street cross sections. And so that presented a fair amount of challenge, particularly when we wanted to look at integrating bike facilities. Next slide. So as we looked at what types of streets would be needed to support the proposed redevelopment and the existing preserved historic development, we found that there are 4 main things that we wanted to look at when looking at the cross sections. We needed to address fire access, as some of the buildings would be needing aerial fire access, which requires a larger space within the streets. We looked at ensuring that the new street types included and supported multimodal needs, including the bike elements and also potential transit elements as needed. We also wanted to make sure that we accounted for the fact that several of the blocks would only have development on one side, or they could actually be blocks that are planned for preservation. And so we took that into account in the process. And then we also wanted to integrate in some of the street designs the biophilic goals of the overall form-based, the overall Barcroft plans. Next. And so with all of that in mind, we went from 3 street cross sections to an additional 7, so 10 total. And all of this work focused entirely within this area that you see here. We do understand that there were questions about how will these added cross sections impact other parts of the neighborhood's code. We think that they might be really solid primers for future updates, but they are limited to these sections given the defined scope of the project. Next. And so within those 7 street cross sections, we had 3 that are associated with internal streets and 4 that are associated with the perimeter streets. This table is sort of a quick lookup guide on what you're going to get with each cross section. All of the interior streets maintain a 6-foot wide clear sidewalk. The exterior streets or perimeter streets include an 8-foot wide sidewalk on George Mason Drive and 4 Mile Run, and then a 10-foot wide sidewalk on Columbia Pike. The 10-foot wide sidewalk is important as it will help integrate with the work that the county is already doing and implementing along the pike and has recently been completed along these frontages. In addition to the clear sidewalks, street trees have been planned, and at least a 6-foot wide street tree zone is proposed. However, 2 of the sections do include staggered street tree and on-street parking within the cross sections, one in the interior and Columbia Pike additionally. And that matches what's been done along Columbia Pike with the commercial code principally. Additionally, we wanted to ensure that on-street parking was provided within the new cross sections. And then we have 4 specific cross sections that provide specifications for bike facilities. We'll talk about some of those in detail. Additionally, we wanted to ensure that we considered the appropriate travel lane sizes. And you'll notice on this that there's one kind of outlier, which is a 12-foot lane in a neighborhood street. That that along with the 2-foot median turn lane provides the 26 feet of clear area required by fire for aerial access. So it is an anomaly, but it was purposeful to address our fire support. And then each of these cross sections has building zones at the back of sidewalk where stoops could be placed, door swings could be accounted for, and other activities and building fenestration could occur. And so with the form-based code, the streets are kind of named very oddly based on their street dimensions. So you'll see they're all titled with a ST 84-20. So the first part there is the overall building face to building face width, and the second is the curb to curb widths. And we'll talk about a few of those sections specifically, and then we can field any other questions with additional slides after the presentation. Next. So the first one I wanted to just quickly walk through was the Columbia Pike Street cross section. This shows the 5 lanes of Columbia Pike that have been built and uniformly provided with the county's project. And then you'll see adjacent to that on the south side, the Barcroft frontage side, a 8-foot wide parking lane that at intervals will also support street trees. Behind that is a 10-foot wide clear sidewalk and a 4-foot wide building zone. With that, we are happy that it's going to support all of the users within the transportation space, not just vehicles in transit, but will provide generous clear sidewalks. Next. And then as we think about the bicycle network that is going to be integrated into the Barcroft neighborhood, we found that there are kind of 3 principal areas that we had to address. One was the zone between between George Mason Drive and South Thomas Street. That is principally what we're calling a biophilic bike corridor, and we'll get into the cross section of that next. Then there's a segment between South Thomas Street and Wakefield, and also along Wakefield, which we initially looked at providing on-street bike lanes so that we didn't put too much space in the street while also supporting fire needs. We had some questions throughout the process, and we're happy to come back with a pretty unique and forward-thinking solution, which we'll talk about also in the next slides. And then there's a final connecting segment along 4 Mile Run Drive from Wakefield to the WOND or connection. And for that segment, we're envisioning a 2-way on-street cycle track along a shorter segment of 4 Mile Run Drive Minor. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk about 12th Street. So 12th Street is illustrated here, where it provides parking on both sides of the street, 11-foot wide travel lanes, and a 4-foot buffer. That the combination of the 4-foot buffer and the 11-foot travel lanes provides the 26 feet needed for fire. But the buffer also, along with the on-street parking, provides the opportunity for a turn lane at George Mason Drive without significantly eating into the streetscape. And then on the edges of that, we're providing a 2-foot, I think it's a 2-foot buffer between the curb and a 6-foot wide one-way sidewalk grade bike facility. And then a planted buffer with street trees is provided between those facilities and the clear sidewalk. And then adjacent to that is a smaller dooryard. We're reaching the maximum of fire constraints, which is a 30-foot zone between the travel lane and the face of building. So what we're looking at is a 2-foot zone there. However, the code does allow for additional 4 to 6 foot of space at the ground floor to support dooryards. And so next facility is, or next section is the 81-40 street sections. And this is where we came up with the idea of having and presenting in the code an optional design, one with on-street bike lanes, and the other with a bi-directional sidewalk grade cycle track. The reasoning behind having the options here versus picking one or the other is that we felt that there was enough unknown in the final engineering that while I think everybody that has participated in this would want to see the cycle track facility, there are some questions, particularly at how the cycle track engages at Columbia Pike and other critical engagement points that we would want to evaluate both of these options while seeing final use permit applications. The one important part of this is that regardless of the how the bikes and the cars are dealt with, the face of building to face of building dimensions are the same at 81 feet, and the sidewalk and streetscape facilities are principally the same, with a 6-foot tree planting area, a 6-foot clear sidewalk, and a 4-foot dooryard for either scenario. And then the last section, actually, that's all we have for you. And so I'm going to let Matt talk about the recommendations, and if you'd like to speak about additional cross sections, we can talk about that in the discussion.
All right, so these mirror what's already in the staff report, and kind of give you the totality of everything that needs to pull this together, starting with the first item, which involves those more larger comprehensive plan elements, including the general land use plan and the master transportation plan. And in the second part, the language references those more technical form-based code changes that for the most part apply to the neighborhood's form-based code that will moving forward govern what happens on Barcroft apartments, but consequently involve some very minor adjustments to the commercial form-based code now that we have to remove sections of Barcroft that previously used to live in that document. So collectively, you can see here the actions that are moving forward to the board's agenda for later this month. And we just wanted to make sure, in case it was helpful, to reference that if you're ready to signal any feedback. With that, I think we are done. Thank you.
Excellent. And there's no one else presenting on this, Geraldine, sure, anybody? No. Okay. Any public comment before we start discussion on the commission? Okay, seeing none, open it up to any commission members who have any comments or questions. Commissioner Locker.
I had a question, more of a process or understanding question. How is why do we need to change the GLUP?
Great question. The reason for that is because the planned network of streets that future redevelopment will deliver are not only codified in the master transportation plan, but we use that same layer in our general land use plan. So those white lines do show up on top of the land use designations. And in addition, separate from the transportation network, we have, through our visioning process last year, identified 3 areas for public spaces to be delivered. Those have shifted throughout the process, and we need to document them on the land use plan as well with those black triangles. And then finally, the shifting of which revitalization district, therefore which code, allows the redevelopment to move forward and regulates how it happens. Those have shifted throughout the process as well, so that now only the neighborhood's form-based code really governs that vision moving forward and allows us to review it more coherently. All those things are represented in that one map. So in addition to the bicycle and street network changes, we also had to make those tweaks as well.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to talk briefly about the second to last slide where you discussed the 2 possible options for bike lanes, and you had the bidirectional lane, which I'm personally in preference of, but I just wanted to hear more of your rationale for offering us both of those options and not siding with one or the other.
So I think the main issue there was that, one, we want to see what the exact developments are that are building out these facilities, and we want to ensure that there are no engineering or safety issues associated with the designs that would push us one way or the other. Principally, I think that the recommendation would be to go with the bidirectional cycle track and ensure the connections at 4 Mile Run and at Glebe Road, but also there will be somewhat of a tricky connection along 12th, that 12th Street section. So we just want to make sure that all those nodes are addressed in detail and correctly before ending up with one or the other.
Commissioner Lynn, tell me.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple questions. Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. You took care of one question. For the Columbia Pike ST 95.569, what is different that we have to have a different color for that portion from what already exists? Because Columbia Pike already has a standard, presumably its entire length. What is the difference that we need to have a different color for this portion of it?
One of the 3 cross sections in the neighborhoods code is a Columbia Pike cross section. What we found with that section was that the spacing from the travel lane to the face of building far exceeded any fire requirements that were out there. We also found that this approach that we're putting forward with this is much more compatible with the sections that are in the in the commercial code. This is very similar to a commercial code section, and that, in part, one of the things that I think planning had thought about, and I'll let Matt speak more to it, is what should the ground floor uses be? We've had the ability to have a much more constrained study area. So we have been able to study the block sizes and things like that to think about what the ground floor uses are. And you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but we are in this section, we are prohibiting residential uses at the ground floor for the new buildings within Barcroft. And that kind of ties in line with also the streetscape that's getting delivered, which I said is much more akin to the commercial code section. If there were ground floor units, we may want to see a little bit more separation and things that might be more difficult to deliver.
So it gives us a little more flexibility than if we were using the other Columbia Pike standards. Is sort of that what I'm hearing?
I would say that this is a much more deliverable section than the existing neighborhood section, and it's compatible with the commercial code sections.
Okay. Second question, for ST 86-40, there is a 4-foot buffer in the middle. Is that just 2 yellow painted lines that are separated? Is it actually a little median that's going to be there?
I think it would be a painted section, though I think there's the form-based code doesn't get to that level of detail. So we would have the ability to analyze that with the final site plan or final use permits that bring the construction of those segments
Okay,
forward.
part of the reason I raise it is I'm trying to minimize paving. Do we really even need to have that there? Would it be better to pull everything in a little bit and have a little more permeable space or tree space on the sides?
I do need it for fire access. Our fire department has weighed in and said, these are the areas I need 26 feet of clear width for my outriggers.
Okay.
As much as I might have my own opinions about that,
And as you know, I do too.
they control that discussion.
Okay.
I will acquiesce to that.
Okay, thank you. That answers that. And finally, parking. I've gone through that area a couple times and I noticed this, what will be streets right now are essentially parking access alleys that are sort of a mess. So this will be a nice cleanup, but it also provides a good amount of parking for the people who live there and they are used. Are we losing parking by converting these to streets, or will be able to still at some point have overall the same amount of parking that is available now within the Barcroft development?
So while these changes don't address that issue specifically, the process did look at that in depth. And so a couple things are happening. The parking's changing from head-in parking to parallel on-street parking. But what also was a lot of the development is centered, or a lot of the new development is centered around these fronting streets. And because of that, all that new development would have its own structured parking associated with it in a way that the historic parking or historic properties don't have. But we were very conscious about looking at the existing parcel properties to remain and seeing whether or not, this throws everything out of whack. We don't think it throws everything out of whack. We think that we can get pretty close to a 1-for-1 ratio, combining on-street resources and the existing private sort of spaces that are used for parking going into the future.
Because it always struck me that going from head-in parking to parallel, you're losing roughly half the spaces, roughly. And since we're doing that, that's why my concern was, where are we going to put those other half of the cars that people are using right now? And I assume that is private in that people have to have stickers to park there because it's not public parking.
And part of the big thing is that there are corresponding units that are coming offline to build the new ones. And so there's a reduction in some of the demand. There's a production of new parking, and there is the replacement of that removed head-in with 50% less, but still on-street parking supply.
And that on-street parking would still be for people who live there by some method rather than public parking that anybody could park in and not get ticketed or towed.
There's still some technical things to work out with that. Right?
I urge you to do that because.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. One of the challenges that we have right now is that in some ways, on-street parking historically in the county has been protected through RPP. And so this neighborhood does not have RPP today.
Right, but Buckingham doesn't either, and it has what looks like street parking that is really reserved for the tenants.
Yes, we understand this is an ongoing challenge, and we'll be addressing it both from the county side and from the JL side as we see new projects come forward.
Okay, because I will be following up on this one. So
as you should.
I'm very much interested in how this evolves, but I am concerned to make sure that people in these houses will have place to put their cars, because a lot of them are dependent on it, given that they're not the traditional taking the bus to downtown, but rather having to go to a CVS in Fairfax or a restaurant in Alexandria, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and what we've also found is, some neighborhoods in the future may need to address EV parking, but this is a neighborhood that may need to address light duty trucks and service vehicle parking.
Exactly.
and other things like that, which are integral to this community. And we've been very conscious of that.
Yeah, and 4 Mile Runoff and serve for that sort of parking. But anyway, yes, thank you. And like I said, I think we will be following up on these questions.
Others?
No, I
Sure.
think my points were covered in the parking questions, and then you mentioned about the commercial vehicles. I know that's a high one. Taxi cab drivers utilize a lot of the parking there in terms. So I know we often have a conversation about reducing parking, but those are one of the areas where the light duty commercial vehicles that you mentioned and whatnot. There's a high utilization there for the folks that live in that area.
And the challenge here is the difference between commercial vehicles and personal vehicles that are used in a commercial capacity. And so it's a trick, and it's something that I think we've been very conscious of, and I think JL is understanding of their tenants.
Commissioner Flores.
Something you said a little bit earlier, I want to ask a clarifying question for. You mentioned that units will come offline, which will help reduce parking. Is that a permanent thing? Are we reducing the number of units, period?
So overall, what will happen is the units that come offline will have associated new construction units delivered. So
Okay.
We will continue to maintain the commitment of how many units?
Yeah, all 1,335 will be on the property. A portion of them will be in new construction. There'll be 3 low-income housing tax credit
Yeah.
projects, but collectively between those 3 and the preserved and renovated buildings, we will
Okay.
add up to 1,335.
I just wanted to make sure I clarified that because there's a difference between, and I want to make sure we recognize and take notice of the difference between the required parking load during construction and the required parking load after updates are made. But I share the sentiment that my fellow commissioners have already communicated of this is one area where a reduction in parking is really not an option, just given who is living there and what they do.
Commissioner Theo.
Yes, my apologies if this was covered earlier in the presentation. I was late arriving. But regarding 12th Street South and particularly the intersection with Thomas Street, I believe, I see in the document there are plans to remove 12th Street South between South Thomas and Vermont, I believe. I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit more.
I think it might be a 12th Road. So if
12th Road, sorry, yes.
if we go back up to the MTP map, that'll be beneficial.
So Rob, I can speak to these if you want.
Yes, please.
So we're not removing, we're just realigning. So one of the things that we looked at through this process is topographically and from a development perspective, how do we keep a continuous east-west connection? So you can see that we have 12th Road South between South Thomas Street and South George Mason in its general existing alignment. The existing or current MTP map shows a line that then kind of connects between South Thomas and a new street that's not going to be built anymore. So in our recommendations, we have a street that's connecting between South Thomas and South Wakefield.
And looking at this slide, it appears that 12th Street South would not be, or at least the 2 sections of 12th Street South would not be lining up with each other. So a cyclist, for example, using 12th Street South would still have to zig back onto South Thomas Street before continuing on, correct?
Yes, and we recognize that. And at time of construction and design, those type of treatments for safe connectivity and maneuvers between the 12th Streets would be addressed.
So that would be more of a site plan issue then when individual specific developments around that intersection crop up?
Yeah, it'd be a design issue at time of implementation.
And we also recognize that this is an area where you may transition facility types. So you may be going on street in on-street lanes west of Thomas potentially, or you could have, as we showed in the slides, you could have bi-directional cycle track for that segment, but the segment between Thomas and George Mason would be one way on each side of the street. So you'd have to link those facilities appropriately. And so we envision that some serious
Understood.
designs there.
Yeah, having a seamless biking experience along 12th Road is pretty important to me. That's probably my biggest concern, honestly, about the Barcroft redevelopment, because with Columbia Pike itself not being bikeable at all, and the county deciding to rely on those adjacent parallel routes, this needs to be as bike friendly as possible.
We also recognize that cyclists will have a series of choices throughout this network. The cycling 4 Mile Run and the WOD, and then using George Mason to get north, may provide a more gradual slope and with protected facilities, where we know that the terrain inside of Barcroft is pretty hilly, particularly getting up to Thomas Street. And so if you want the shorter but maybe a little bit more exercise in it route, we'll have that. But you would also have, through a series of county projects, the George Mason Drive improvements to help with that.
Understood. Thank you.
Commissioner Mendelson.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify some details about the two street segments on South 4 Mile Run Drive, particularly ST 67-43 and ST 66-40. Are the travel lane widths of 13 feet for both directions being maintained due to fire department requirements? And is that also the case for the 11-foot wide travel lanes both directions and the 4-foot bollard space?
We'll speak to that directly.
Great, thank you.
I think they're the last two slides, the last two. And that one, that's one. Okay, so why don't we start with, actually go to the next one. Let's see, here we go. So this is 4 Mile Run Drive without the bike facilities. And it has 13-foot travel lanes. That is to support the fire access. And then the next one, if we go back one slide, along 4 Mile Run Drive, this has the cycle track from Wakefield to the WOD. And in this case, what fire has told us they can use is when we have the bollards and the parking stops as the buffer, they can count that space towards the required 26 feet of width. So we're allowed to, in that space, narrow the travel lanes down to our more standard sizes, incorporating the bike buffer into the fire access needs.
Perfect. And then that would mean we could not use potentially more physical barriers to separate cars from bikes, right? As the fire department would kind of need to use that space between the travel lanes like White Line and the bollard, right?
I'll say the most extreme of that options by having a grade separated facility with a buffer, we would not be able to provide at this time. That fire code may change, fire requirements may change, and if that was the case, we I'm certain would implement that as part of the requirements, because it's one of those things that can be modified at the time of the final site plan is some of these design elements.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Commissioner Hussein.
Thanks. I want to return to the bike conversation. So I think most of the section of 12th Street Road, I'm sorry, the grade separated, like the grade protected lane, I personally like that a lot. I think that's really great that it's a fully grade separated bike lane. But I wonder the other part of that, where we were having the conversation of the two options. I was just wondering if you could explain why we can't have the first thing, the fully grade separated on that section. I don't know if that question made sense or not. I'm sorry.
So part of it does get back to the fire access. Part of the
Okay.
thing that you don't see and that we had to struggle with also is that Some of the areas, well, actually, let me ask you to clarify because I want to make sure. Are you asking why we wouldn't put the bi-directional versus the cycle track as the protected type facility, or just a distinction between these two?
No, so the I think the way it is, I think maybe in the slide previous, so that like the section of 12th Road between, yeah, so if you just go a slide previous, so the sidewalk grade protected bike lane, that to me is really nice. So I'm just wondering if that can't be applied to the bidirectional versus the on-street.
So we do envision that the bi-directional would be sidewalk grade.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. That I think that clarified my question. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Flores.
I'm unsure if you will have the answer to this, but do we have an updated timeline on when the site plans or the ask for transportation commission input on the design of how this plays out beyond what we're talking about tonight? Do we have an updated timeline on when we will be seeing that?
So I'll start with part of that, maybe kick the rest over to Chair Lynch. The first project is coming forward to the board this hearing. The TC does not weigh in on form-based code use permit applications. However, there is representation, I think, at AUG, which does review the plans. And then there's the Planning Commission and County Board actions. And so that first one's coming forward. That's right. And we'll deliver the first segment of South Taylor Street. And then I'll kick it over to Kathy Puskar to maybe, or Matt to respond to the rest.
So part of the answer here to your question is, what is the phasing of how this site will ultimately redevelop? And I guess over the next few months, we have greater level of certainty of what we expect to come forward. Beyond that, I think it's driven by a lot of different factors. So we just don't have those answers. But I think what I heard you say is really, when can this group have another chance to review some of this? And to Rob's point, this is really it. Partly because we are getting so detailed into what's being codified here that it's meant to be so prescriptive that we don't need to come back. And that's kind of some of the benefits, right or wrong, of the form-based code, in that we try to do the best we can working with the community, commissions like this one, to make sure that we really specify what has to happen, and therefore there isn't as much of a need to negotiate and kind of reevaluate or even re-envision moving forward.
Completely understand that. I have deep considerations that I think a lot of us had discussed when you came in front of us with this, I think back in November, if I remember correctly, about the grade and the cycling, and how we protect our residents. And so would encourage an opportunity as things get codified through the design process to at least have something to enable us to speak to that, even if it means amending the process. I think I've heard a lot of my fellow commissioners' comments be around, is this what design we're talking about now? And when the answer is no, we hold back on the comments so we don't overload you. But I think we do have some concerns about how we protect the safety of cyclists and pedestrians, and vehicle and drivers through this plan.
Yeah, I will say what happens in a lot of different sites along Columbia Pike as they go through their special exception use permit. There are instances where, through the benefit of having an applicant at the table, staff learning some additional information, there have been instances in the past where the form-based code actually has to be amended in order for the use permit to go forward. In those instances, when we have transportation-related items, we do bring those back to this group. And I would imagine if anything really significantly changed, that might happen. But really, I think we're using this venue to get as much feedback as we can so that we get the best and most prescriptive level of detail in the code.
Excellent. Anyone else? Right. I'll just say, as a nearby resident in Columbia Forest, I really appreciate the changes to the plan that we've seen in this most recent rendition. Some of the upgrades on the bike lanes, the sidewalks, some of the street cross sections. I think take into account some of the previous feedback that had been mentioned. One question that I had about the possible cycle track portion north of Wakefield Street. I wasn't sure on the diagrams. In fact, we've got the perfect slide up. It doesn't look like it extends the length to Columbia Pike, but Robert, you had mentioned it in your voice track. I wanted to just clarify, is the intention for it to extend to Columbia Pike, or is the intention that it's going to connect to the Washington and Old Dominion Trail before it gets to there? Essentially, it'll curve to the west to intersect with the trail before it reaches the current site of like the Goodwill store that's at the corner of 4 Mile and Columbia Pike.
We do envision the facilities to go all the way from Columbia Pike to 4 Mile Run along Wakefield, allowing a continuation into the neighborhoods to the north. That north of Columbia Pike, the dynamics change and the densities change. That is more of, I believe that we have it on the MTP as actually, yeah, it begins some of the neighborhoods. I can't remember the term. Kristen, please.
So I actually think the question was about South 4 Mile Run Drive, right? And whether or not the cycle track on South 4 Mile Run Drive continues all the way to Columbia Pike, or if it connects with the WNOD. And we envision that it will connect to the WNOD through the area that's kind of adjacent to the parking lot right now. And if we are talking about South Wakefield, we have the bike boulevard plans that exist north of Columbia Pike.
Thank you. Yeah, that was exactly what I was asking. Is the intention for the portion that's on South 4 Mile Run Drive is that portion will connect probably, like you mentioned, somewhere in that parking lot just to the west of the Goodwill site into the WNOD trail?
Yes,
Right.
that's the intention.
Okay.
And then funnel everyone to the facilities that are made for that crossing.
Okay. And then the final thing I'll say is that I think a lot of the connectivity of this area, especially for cyclists, is going to benefit the most from the South George Mason Drive multimodal trail. So I'll just throw a plug in there that I really hope we find more ways to fund that and make that happen sooner, because I think that'll help quite a bit with enhancing the ability for residents in this area to take full advantage of going to other areas like Shirlington and connecting north and south throughout the site, because that part of it is a little bit more reasonable in terms of the hills that are in that area. Any further discussion on the commission before I move to motion to adopt the resolution? Okay, seeing none, I move to adopt the resolution to amend the general land use plan map and booklet and proposed amendments to the master transportation plan map, and adopt the ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify the Arlington County Zoning Ordinance Appendix A, which is the Columbia Pike Commercial Form-Based Code, and Appendix B, which is the Columbia Pike Neighborhoods Form-Based Code, to implement the Barcroft Master Financing and Development Plan and associated policy updates adopted by the county board in July of 2024. Any seconds?
Second?
Thank you. Any discussion on the specific motion? Okay, we will move to vote. Commissioner Coleman,
Aye.
Commissioner Flores,
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein,
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi,
Aye.
Commissioner Locker,
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow,
Aye.
Commissioner Mendelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon,
Aye.
Commissioner Theo,
Aye.
and I, as acting chair, Commissioner Furman, will also vote aye. And I believe that is 10-0 on ayes over nays. So that officially is adopted, and that is it for this item on the agenda. Thank you all very much.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the Melwood site plan, and we have staff member Bryce Johnson presenting on this issue.
All right, thank you very much. Take it away.
All right. Good evening. My name is Bryce Johnson. I'm with the Department of Environmental Services. I am the Principal Planner in the Development Services Bureau for the Melwood Development Project at 750 23rd Street South. This project is scheduled for the February 22nd County Board meeting. Skipped ahead. The project consists of 4 items, one of which is for County Board review only. The 3 primary applications include a proposal to amend the GLUP designation for the site from public to low-medium residential, a rezoning from the C1 local commercial district and R6 one-family dwelling district to the RA818 multifamily dwelling district, and a site plan to permit a 5-story mixed-use building consisting of residential and institutional uses. Development also includes a use permit for County Board review only to allow Melwood, representing the institutional use of the site plan, to operate as a community service use. The proposal represents a partnership between Wesley Housing, who will construct the new housing, and Melwood, the nonprofit operating the site today. They propose a 5-story building, including 105 committed affordable units and ground floor space for Melwood to continue operating. The site will include 94 parking spaces and a below-grade single-floor garage, which I will cover in more detail on another slide. The proposal also includes zoning modifications in order to allow an additional 47 units above the permitted base density, reduce the residential parking ratio to 0.7 spaces per unit, and exclude certain elements from density calculations. This location is served by a variety of transportation options, including bus stops spaced a block apart along 23rd Street South, nearby metro stations, and a bike share station on South Hay Street to the west. The site is subject to the policy guidance found in the Master Transportation Plan, or MTP, with additional guidance provided in a 2024 special GLUP study conducted for this specific site last year. The MTP designates the adjacent segment of 23rd Street South as a Type E arterial road, which is planned to contain 2 to 4 travel lanes, no restrictions on driveway access, medium on-street parking priority, a minimum 4 to 6 foot wide landscape strip, and minimum 5 to 6 foot wide sidewalk. The MTP designates the adjacent segment of South Grant Street to be a neighborhood local street, which is planned to contain either a yield condition street or 2 travel lanes, no restrictions on driveway access, a minimum 2 to 4 foot wide landscape strip, and a minimum 4 to 6 foot wide sidewalk. As I mentioned before, the county conducted a special GLUP study and accepted the study in May of 2024. The study supported the proposed GLUP designation change subject to specific guiding principles, including transportation guidance. Generally speaking, the study recommends that the proposal ensure the recommended streetscapes meet the minimum MTP standards, include improvements as necessary to maximize pedestrian safety, improve the existing bus stop to be fully ADA accessible, including having a rear landing pad, locate parking below grade, locate loading on site out of the right of way, and evaluate the proposed driveway entrance based on the anticipated impacts to the existing residential uses. So now I'll cover the proposed conditions, starting with the site access. The site currently contains 2 driveway entrances on 23rd Street South. The applicant proposes to repurpose one entrance as the entrance to the below-grade parking garage, shown as the purple arrow, and to close the other entrance, which would be to the east or to the right of that arrow. The applicant proposes a second driveway entrance to serve loading and trash pickup. This will be accessed from South Grant Street, shown via the yellow arrow in the bottom right of the screen. This entrance includes a driveway so that the actual loading bay is set back from the street, so that there will be space for vehicles to be able to maneuver on site out of the right of way, not blocking the sidewalk or street. Bike parking is provided via bike racks on 23rd Street South, shown via the blue B. This is adjacent to the main building entrance shown as the red arrow. There are also secure bike storage rooms inside, one room in the garage and one on the ground floor. Finally, the proposal retains the existing Metro bus stop located on site at the intersection of 23rd Street South and South Grant Street. This is shown via the green T. The stop currently includes a shelter and is paired with another bus stop on the opposite side of the street. The applicant proposes a curb extension in order to provide that rear landing pad for the bus stop. Moving to parking loading, I am showing both the required and proposed parking on screen for comparison. The applicant proposes a total of 94 parking spaces. This includes 74 residential parking spaces and 20 institutional use parking spaces. Those would be for Melwood. As I mentioned before, the applicant is requesting a reduced residential parking ratio of 0.7 spaces per unit. The applicant also proposes at least 53 bicycle spaces, including 47 secure bike spaces within the building, as well as 6 street spaces outside. In images to the right, you can see the parking access to the below-grade garage via the purple arrow and the loading access from South Grant Street via the yellow arrow. I've also highlighted the bike rooms in blue for your awareness. Next, we'll review 23rd Street South. This slide shows 2 cross sections of the proposed street conditions. The applicant proposes to maintain an approximate street width of 60 feet. On the street, the applicant proposes 2 additional parking spaces, a passenger loading zone, and 2 short-term or 15-minute parking spaces. The passenger loading zone would be located at the main building entrance. One of the on-street parking spaces will also be ADA accessible. That space will be located to the right or the east of the passenger loading zone. For the streetscape, the applicant is increasing the landscape strip from 4.5 feet to 5 feet in width and the sidewalk from 5 to 6 feet in width. The top right image shows the typical street cross-section facing west with the property on the left. The increased streetscape features are shown in bold. The bottom right image shows where the cross-section includes the passenger loading zone proposed at the main building entrance. Instead of the landscape strip, in the streetscape, there will instead be an access aisle and associated curb ramp connecting to the sidewalk. I will note that the access aisle will be at the same width as the landscape strip and curb, so there will be a consistent streetscape alignment with a straight sidewalk path. And as I mentioned before, when approaching the intersection, the applicant also proposes the curb extension to provide that rear landing pad for the bus stop. And now I'll move on to South Grant Street. The applicant proposes to widen the majority of the site's frontage in order to accommodate the required aerial access fire lane within the travelway. This new street section will increase from being 24 feet wide to 34 feet in width. It will include 2 travel lanes instead of the yield street condition and remove the Sunday-only parking. On-street parking will be provided along the property's frontage within a curb inset created by the street widening. The image on the right shows the new street condition consisting of the 13-foot wide northbound travel lane, 14-foot wide southbound travel lane, and 7-foot wide parking lane. For the streetscape, the applicant proposes a 6-foot wide landscape strip and 6-foot wide sidewalk matching that provided along 23rd Street South. The street and streetscape to the south of the site will remain in their existing conditions. Moving on from the transportation aspects, I'll cover some of the other proposal highlights. The applicant proposes 100% of the units be committed affordable housing units. These will only be available to residents earning up to 80% area median income for at least 30 years. These will include a mixture of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. These features do further the goals of the Affordable Housing Master Plan. Additionally, the applicant proposes to achieve National Green Building Silver certification to further the goals of the Community Energy Plan. This certification does include energy optimization performance, Energy Star appliances, WaterSense fixtures, and 10 years of energy reporting. Finally, I'll note that the housing incorporates inclusive design features beyond that typically seen for accessible units. This includes wider shared corridors and unit entrances, larger rooms for maneuverability, and adaptable kitchen design. Additionally, Melwood proposes to continue operating on site to provide job training and support services for people with disabilities. So that inclusivity aspect really ties the residential and institutional uses together for the project. Here's a quick overview of the project process so far. This application was accepted for review back in October of last year. Following acceptance, the project has received input on a variety of topics as part of the SPRC discussion. This included online engagement in 2 SPRC meetings. The project is now wrapping up the public review period with the commission meetings in January and February, leading to the county board action later this month. Overall, staff supports approval of the project because it is consistent with the goals of the MTP and the Special Glup study. Staff finds that the proposal meets the MTP standards, specifically by improving the streetscapes with wider sidewalks and landscape strips, and by improving the bus stop with the recommended rear landing pad. Happy to answer any questions. The applicant team's here as well.
Good evening, Kathy Puskar with Walsh Colucci, and I am here on behalf of Wesley Housing and Melwood. Sasha, are you going to pull up our presentation? Okay, Sasha's going to pull it up. This is a really exciting time for us, a joint venture between Melwood and Wesley Housing, where we're able to provide, continue to provide the services that Melwood provides on site today, serving people with disabilities, and then also co-locating that with affordable housing with opportunities for people with disabilities to live in these affordable housing units. So it's a very exciting project, and we're happy to be on our way to the Planning Commission and County Board, and happy to talk to you about transportation issues tonight. Just a quick overview. I know staff did it pretty thoroughly, so I'm just going to go quickly through my few slides. Next. Well, this is just to show you where the site is and what it looks like today. You can see a sea of surface parking, 2 curb cuts on 23rd Street South and 1 on South Grant Street. Next. I think, we've been through, as you heard, the SPRC meetings. There have been a lot of changes to the project over time. I'm just going to hone in on a couple of them, and Felice will touch more specifically on details. But we did, through the process, originally we had the parking and loading both accessing off of South Grant Street. In response to feedback we got from the community and SPRC, we relocated that parking entrance to 23rd Street South. We do have our loading off of South Grant Street, but please understand that the loading and unloading here is very limited. This is not a retail or restaurant. Melwood actually gets most of their deliveries via FedEx or Amazon. And so really that loading dock will be for move-in, move-outs and trash primarily. We also relocated the entrance to the building as you see it, and lined our accessible drop-off area in front of that main entrance. We did increase the sidewalk along 23rd Street South to 6 feet. And then we also enhanced the parking on street. And if we can go to the next slide, you'll see in more detail that 42-foot ADA compliant passenger loading zone. In response to feedback we received from the neighborhoods, from the Disabilities Commission representative on the SPRC and SPRC members, we did increase the number of ADA spaces to include an additional ADA compliant space. We increased to have 2 15-minute pickup drop-off spaces, and then we have 4 standard on-street spaces, which obviously are available to people with disabilities as well. You'll also see that in the garage, in response to that same feedback through the process, we increased the number of accessible parking spaces from 4 to 8, and Felice will go through that. And once again, we are working with the county to expand that bus stop to provide front and rear passenger loading zones, and are also improving the crosswalk at that location. To the next page, we are at the mercy of the fire marshal, and the changes on South Grant Street were primarily dictated by the fire access requirements, which required creating that 26-foot path and being a certain distance from the building, between 15 and 30 feet from the building, which did result in a flipping from the spaces from the opposite side of the street to this side of the street. We did lose a few spaces in that process, but as you just heard, we gained some spaces on 23rd Street South. And just quickly, I'm going to show you some pretty pictures, because why not? We've worked pretty hard on this. So we'll just flip through these 1, 2, 3, 4, just so you all, this is from 23rd Street. Looking at the other side from 23rd Street, going down Grant, coming on Grant at the corner near the loading entrance, and then viewing it from the park. And with that, I'm going to turn it, oh, there may be one more. Oh, yes. Nope. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Felice Brichta with Grove Slade to get into the nitty gritty of the transportation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Felice Bright with Grove Slade, and just wanted to touch on some of the transportation elements of the site. I think just to orient everyone, I think everyone is familiar with the location, but located on 23rd Street South, about 0.6 miles from the Crystal City Metro Station and 0.8 miles from the Pentagon City Metro Station. There are bike routes along 23rd, Fern and Joyce, and then bike lanes along South East Street in the vicinity. There are a number of bus stops within a quarter mile of the site. And then there are additional transit improvements in the vicinity as part of the Better Bus network project, which is still underway. And what that does is looking at updates to the transportation network and extending the operating hours. And there are a couple of stops that are being consolidated just to the west, which you can see there. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see in blue right there. Yeah. And then just touching again on site access, I think this has been covered, but we just wanted to highlight that the existing site is located on the left, and so you can see there's 2 curb cuts on 23rd Street. Those are being consolidated into 1 curb cut on 23rd Street for parking access. And then as Kathy and Bryce mentioned, the loading will be provided on South Grant Street. And then you can also see where the in red, where you can see the existing pedestrian access points are for the existing site. And then in red on the right, you can see where they are for the proposed building. Bicycle parking, I think, again, this was mentioned, so I'll just touch on it briefly, but we do have a ground floor bike room located in the image on the left. The exterior bike racks are located just outside the lobby entrance. So it's really always like to have that ground floor bike room. It's a nice amenity to be able to kind of roll your bike right in at ground level. And there's additional bike parking located in the garage below. So we've got a total of 47 Class 1 spaces and then 6 Class 3 spaces exterior. And then on to touch on the vehicular parking, we have a single level below grade garage, 20 spaces provided for Melwood, and then 74 spaces for a 0.7 space per unit ratio for the residential. And as we'll see on the next slide, that is in line with other recently approved affordable projects. We have a couple of comparable projects shown on the next slide. There you can see some of the comparable sites. And so as we've discussed, I think this is an appropriate ratio for this site, given the proximity to bus stops just on the corner where we are making improvements to even improve the bus stop on that corner, the location given proximity to Metro, and then also, as has been discussed, the site is being designed to accommodate disabled, and so I think there'll be a lot of paratransit use as well. So using that passenger loading zone that's shown out in front on 23rd Street. And then again, just to touch on parking, I think we've talked about this, so I'll cover this quickly, but again, this just shows the existing parking on the left and then the proposed parking on the right. So again, we've got four on-street spaces, 1 accessible space on 23rd, and then 4 short-term spaces, 2 short-term and then 2 pickup drop-off spaces on 23rd. And then on Grant, as we've discussed, the parking stays at 4 spaces, but it shifts from the east side of the street to the west side. And this is the non-Sunday parking. Then the next slide shows the Sunday parking. So again, on 23rd Street, the same 5 on-street spaces with 4 short-term, and then again, the parking shifts from the east to the west side.
So you are losing this parking.
Yes, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Go back. One time.
Yeah. So and as Kathy's pointing out, we are losing some spaces on Sunday, as has been discussed, as we make that shift to accommodate the requirements of the fire marshal. Next slide. And then finally, I wanted to just touch on the TMP elements. Of course, the site will be providing TMP elements that are consistent with typical site plan conditions, in addition to the other improvements that we've already discussed, including the bus stop. So some of the typical TMP elements are participation in funding, contributions to ACCS, designating a property transportation coordinator to stay in contact with the county, the typical facilities and improvements, including displays in the lobbies, smart trip cards, bike share membership, car share membership, and then we'll also be doing a parking management plan as the site enters into the CEP process to coordinate on the controlled access for both Melwood and the residents. And then again, the garage will provide EV parking spaces and the 8A spaces that Kathy mentioned. And with that, I think I'm happy to answer any questions.
I would just add, in addition to having a parking ratio that's consistent with other affordable housing projects that have been built recently, and you can look at that utilization and demand, once again, want to focus on the fact that the beauty of this proposal is that we are marrying together Melwood, which serves people with disabilities, with an affordable housing building that will be built to be accessible to people with disabilities. So not only did you hear that some people are coming and going by paratransit vehicles, but we also have the luxury of hopefully some of the people that are taking advantage of those Melwood services will actually be living in the building. And so you do have, just on top of looking at the normal comparison that you all do with affordable housing projects and the lower ratios associated with those, especially in close proximity to a transit-rich area, you also should take into consideration the people with disabilities and the fact that we are really focused on making this accessible for them, whether they're driving or not.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments before we begin? Yep, please come to the podium.
You have 3 minutes. I'll start the timer.
Yes. Oh, and just press that button for push on the bottom of that microphone. Do you see it? It's like on this. Now try. Thanks for bearing with us.
Okay, yeah, red light. Okay. Hi. My name is Stacy Meyer. I was the Aurora Highlands representative for this Melwood project at the SPRC. The 2 minutes that I thought we had are short. So we provided extensive analysis about the problems posed by this development in writing, which you have been sent. The project is wildly inappropriate, and we asked ourselves what happened. What we found out, it's just too big. And we found out that county staff only included options Melwood would accept for development, no matter what the cost, the impact, or the damage to the people and the buildings around the site. Staff omitted from their studies the essential guidance in the GLUP, which speaks to Arlington's commitment, longstanding commitment, to preserve low-density, single-family neighborhoods such as ours. The building is so tall that Grant Street must be widened to provide adequate turning radius for the fire ladder trucks. If one needed evidence that a building is too tall for a location, having to widen a residential side street to accommodate the ladder fire truck would be it. It's just too tall. The assumptions in the transportation study for the multimodal splits conflicts with the county's own mobility lab statistics. But this invalid assumption was never addressed by staff. The school system is now projecting a 35% increase at Oak Ridge between 2022 and 2028 based on development approvals, yet the traffic projections for this project completely omit those units. How can anyone call a projection traffic report scientific or even meaningful if its projections don't include approved development when there is so much growth? A 35% increase in the school-age population alone in 6 years is huge, and that growth is unaccounted for in the traffic study. The truth is, no one at the county cares about those who live in the neighborhood, the safety issues, or the congestion this project will contribute to. None of our concerns have been addressed at all, which is not how this process is supposed to work or how we were told it would work. We who live in the neighborhood have been treated as nothing more than an obstacle to step over or work around. It is disheartening to be ignored by the very people who are supposed to represent us. We continue to hope that common sense will prevail, and at a minimum, the size of this project will be reduced, but we have seen no evidence of that to date. We hope that something will change tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, did you want to speak as well?
Hi. Hi, Nick Giacobbe. I'm a neighbor in Aurora Highlands and a member of the Aurora Highlands Civic Association. First, I want to align myself with the comments that we just heard from Architect Meyer I think she's really expressed the frustration that the neighborhood has had about not being listened to and hoping at some point all of our analysis would at least be considered. I want to hit on a couple of points. The first is the parking is just too low. 0.7 is too low. The requirement is 139 and they're coming in at 94. One of the things that the Disabilities Commission talked about, and I hope that you've had a briefing from them, is the concern for visitors and for caregivers. There isn't adequate space for the visitors and the caregivers to come and take care of people. And we're talking about people who may need 24-hour coverage, and there just isn't accessibility for them. We talked a little bit about the church parking. For decades, our neighborhood and the county, we have given the churches in our neighborhood Sunday parking on both sides of the streets in several streets in our neighborhood. That's a public good. Melwood is taking that away arbitrarily because the building is too tall and they need the space for the fire department. So I think that's one of the other considerations, is that these arbitrary decisions that are made that are having an impact on the lives of our faith communities in the neighborhood as well. And I think that's really important to consider. Another issue, we heard an awful lot and we continue to hear about the services, the support, and the compassion that the applicant has for their disabled residents and their clients. We heard about the disabled access for the bus stop on the Melwood side of the street. They're not doing anything on the other side of the street. So how are people who are heading westbound going to get off the bus? They choose not to address that. In fact, they basically said that's the taxpayer's problem. This community has a real dearth of community benefits. I think that an improvement to an accessible bus stop on the other side of the street is not an unreasonable request that you may consider asking for. Finally, I ask you to take a close look at the PUDO, the pickup, the drop-off, and the package trucks and the space that's available for them. 105 units plus 17,000 feet of program space is a lot of space. That's a lot of people coming and going. That's a lot of PUDO. That's a lot of FedEx, Amazon, DHL, USPS, fill in the blank delivery trucks coming and going all day. So I encourage you to really dig into that. And then also look at the transportation demand program. Is it long enough? Is the year that's set out enough, or should it be longer? So thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to your conversation.
Thank you so much. Any other requests for public comment? Okay, hearing none. We can move to commissioner comments, and Commissioner Theo, I'll go to you first because I know you were in the SPRC for this project.
Correct. Yes, I was had the pleasure of attending the SPRC in December, I think, with Commissioner Lantomy as well. So I'm already pretty familiar with the recent changes to the Melwood site plan. Just want to reiterate, though, that I was very happy with the separation of the garage entrance and the main pedestrian entrance. That's a wonderful move, and the more I see it now, the more it really is the right change. So thank you on that. And realignment of the main entrance with PUDO, the pickup drop-off, is also a great move. Thank you for adding the ADA space on South Grant. That it will be much needed. And I am still not happy about the 27-foot width of South Grant, but I understand that is a local fire department ask, and not much you can do about it. So that's a bigger problem that the county will have to tackle. Overall, very happy with the Melwood site plan as it's developed. It will be provide much needed affordable housing, especially for our neighbors with developmental disabilities. And I think it'll be a great addition to the neighborhood, and it will be celebrated by future residents. Thank you.
Who else? Commissioner Flores.
Thank you. I attended the first SPRC meeting, which dove into not specifically transportation, but I do want to echo my sentiments with Commissioner Theo. I am very impressed with the migration of the main entrance for the Melwood. I think that change was very needed. And that's all I have for now. I do have a ton of questions, but I'd love for my fellow commissioners to go first.
Who else would like to go? Commissioner Ludlow.
Yeah, I just wanted to know a little bit more about the parking ratios, and I was reading in the staff report Can you clarify, is this on par with other parking ratios? Is it reduced? Is it more? And what are the special characteristics of parking demand that would be associated with this facility versus not facility, this building configuration that's principally serving an underserved population? Thank you. Yep.
Sure, of course. And we can pull up the slide that looks at we have a table in there that talks about the comparable affordable ratios. Yeah, here it is. And so we pulled some of we have more data, but we pulled some of the sites that are comparable in terms of distance to metro and just where they're located along corridors within the county. And you can see here, this shows the supply that they have on site. So the average supply is about 0.82 spaces per unit, and then the demand is shown in the two columns on the right. So you can see here that between those three sites that are all located within Arlington, the demand is about 0.61. And so our proposed supply here is 0.7. So we think that it's definitely in line with other comparable affordable sites. And yes, I think, again, the parking does serve both the Melwood space and then also the residential space. And so as Kathy mentioned, we think there will be a lot of kind of synergies between those two uses. So I think that further supports the ratio that we're seeing here kind of compared to some other sites.
Yeah, and then just to follow up, based on the comments that we received today from the public, do these ratios and comparables take into account the surge that this neighborhood gets, I believe because of at least Sunday church attendance and other types of activities? Does it take that into account as well?
So the parking ratio is really for the site. This is the ratio that's provided in the garage for the residential use, and then there are 20 spaces that are provided for Melwood. So it's really the site parking that this addresses.
Have you examined the impacts on parking around the site in the neighborhood and on the streets?
So as we showed, there will be some loss of spaces on South Grant. There's the addition of a couple of spaces on 23rd Street South. But to your point, the churches, people park in the street when they go to church. They're public streets. They park on public streets. I don't know how else that we're supposed to address that as a private property owner.
Thank you.
Commissioner Locker.
Just wanted to piggyback on the transportation analysis and the traffic impacts. As one of the speakers, commenters, spoke about just impacts to schools and how that traffic was that, and it was not included in your analysis. Can you just explain generally your process and what is included, what is not included, and maybe why, and kind of address some of that concern?
Yep, certainly. So before we start the MMTA process, we have a scoping meeting where we kind of sit down with staff and we identify other developments that are located in the area that we need to include to accommodate that background traffic. So there were a number of background developments that we included that are all things that are approved, and they've been through the 4.1 process in Crystal City, up in Pentagon City, that are all proximate to the site. And then in addition to that, there's on certain roadways, there's like regional traffic that gets applied to just kind of pick up, other regional traffic. So all of those things get vetted at the beginning of the process, and then we confirm those assumptions, kind of coordinating with staff, making sure that we're covering all the things that are known, and then we proceed with the MMTA. So it's kind of fully vetted through the process.
So it was considered.
Yeah, yes, we have a number of background developments that were included
considered in part of the. Yes, I just wanted to clarify.
Commissioner Coleman.
Yeah, just to kind of go back to the question on parking, particularly for Sundays, I just want to drill down a little bit more on that and get more confirmation about your process of trying to mitigate the potential for crowding out of parishioners who will be attending church particularly during the surge periods on Sundays. I think that's something worth considering more in ways of how the entire space can be used so that people who are attending church on that street won't be completely out of street parking. And I understand there are limitations, of course, but I just want to get some more assurances that mitigation strategies have been observed in trying to go through this process.
So the requirements on South Grant Street are coming from the fire marshal. Those requirements would be there whether the building's 60 feet tall or 35 feet tall, as the community has requested. That is where that kicks in. And that impacts the parking that's on street. That is almost like a yield street today. And I mean, it works, you know, people have done it for years and years, but it's not a standard condition. As you know, like I said, when people go to church, they kind of find on-street spaces. Melwood does have 20 spaces in the garage that will be available for their visitors. And to the extent that they kind of work with the adjacent churches to come up with any future agreement, that is a possibility. But that's something that Melwood would do kind of separately with those churches after the process at some point in the future. So there could be potential on Sundays for additional parking in the building, but that would have to be discussed and considered with a number of factors that are going on. But the churches would just continue to park on street. And does that mean someone has to walk a little bit further? Perhaps.
Commissioner Flores.
To piggyback off of those comments, how many spaces does the current agreement between Melwood and the neighboring church allot for?
Well, the agreement is just an informal agreement that they can use the parking lot.
So my question still stands. How many
spaces are in the parking lot? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Okay. Hold on one sec.
sure. While they are looking up that number, there's a current informal agreement between a neighboring church and Melwood that every Sunday, the churchgoers are able to utilize the spaces on the surface lot. And my concern is in line with yours. We will see a large influx of the need for parking on streets because those spaces are going away.
Yes, and the church has participated in this process, and they are supportive of the project. But as to that number of spaces, we're trying to find you that number.
While they continue to look, one thing I wanted to ask that Commissioner Flores, you may in fact know some of the answer to this, and if not, it can be a question for the applicant. Most of the surrounding area is RPP controlled. It's the segmented various zone ones that are in this area is part of the concern that are these zones active on weekends, I guess is my first question, because some are, like the one I live in is, some are not. Is this a zone that is active on Saturday and Sunday?
It is not.
Okay.
Sorry.
Commissioner Locker, did you want to say something while we wait? Yeah, is there your mic? Your mic's off.
But we think it's about 44 spaces.
Commissioner Locker, back to you.
Oh, no, this is a process question that I have, so something totally different. So
Got it. Yep. Commissioner Theo?
Yes, regarding the parking spaces that the church and nearby churches currently use. This is not a question for the developers or for property owners, more of like a general statement that I don't consider the property owner of Melwood to be under an obligation to provide free parking for members of the community or churches or anything like that. I don't think it's a responsibility that Melwood should have to undertake, especially since this has been an informal agreement. The churches, really anyone, is under the obligation to provide parking for their members. If the churches wanted to, they could, I'm sure, purchase some nearby property and convert it into a surface parking lot for the members. So that's much better than trying to require a private property owner, especially a nonprofit that's developing affordable housing, to provide parking spaces for unrelated organizations. Unlike what's been sort of commented before in public comment, free parking is not a public good.
Commissioner Flores?
I agree, Commissioner Theo. It's a interesting conversation that we're seeing as we're watching this neighborhood grow in population, and we have the noticeable difference in housing types. We have a few blocks in central Crystal City that is medium and high rise. And then Aurora Highlands is a still majorly detached single family home location. And it is going to be an interesting struggle. And while I agree that it is not the responsibility of Melwood in any capacity or the applicant in any capacity to provide free parking, and it is on the church to ensure that their members have parking. My consideration and reason for bringing it up is that I, as a community member who lives in Aurora Highlands, have not seen the church come forward with a strategy beyond, I guess they will park on the street. And my concern there is that the neighborhood will be overloaded with the current parking that's going away.
Commissioner Ludlow.
So just to be clear, the main issues that the Civic Association are expressing concern about are over the scale and size of the project, the height, its compatibility with the neighborhood, and some of the parking issues. I'm just I don't know who can answer it. I'm just asking.
And I have another question associated.
Okay,
with that.
go ahead, please.
Because I think that those were two, as well as the impacts of the Nellie Custis Park. And as a process question, it looks like the current GLUP has the parcel as part of a park. And so I wanted to understand a little bit about the current use. It's obviously not a park, but how that is going to be impacted, or what piece of that is going to be impacted as part of this plan, and if that is also a concern.
Sure. In 1981, the county swapped land with the prior owner of this property, and the county got land in Ballston that the county was able to develop. And the prior owner and Melwood, as a successor in interest, got this property. And through that agreement, it contemplated that redevelopment could occur on that property. However, there are two parcels. What we are talking about, and I don't know if you can pull up a picture, anyone. We're on parcel A, which is where the building and the surface parking lot are. Another parcel that was part of that swap is called parcel B, affectionately. And it's down in the corner. It's off this picture, but in that bottom left corner, Sasha, if you could just maybe take the arrow, that area right there is actually owned by Melwood. But as part of that land swap agreement, that parcel right there is part of Nellie Custis Park, and it is to stay open space in perpetuity. Yes. All of that stays. That's Nellie Custis Park, and that remains untouched. And we actually, through the process, pushed the building farther and farther away from Nellie Custis Park in response to feedback that we got relative to wanting to have good distance between that park. So not only did we set the building back farther, we have step backs that then step back as you go up the building.
Yeah, I don't know who can confirm that for me. I just wanted to make sure that I had a clear understanding of the range of issues that the Civic Association and neighborhood are concerned about. And then I wanted to make sure that we and that staff had addressed that those had been addressed somehow through this process. So thank you.
Commissioner Flores.
So the Civic Association, we as a commission received a letter that the Civic Association has sent to one of the county board representatives with 3 outlined issues. So I'll read them off in title. Issue 1 is Melwood is not a community center. It's an office. So it's a zoning classification issue. Issue 2, the existing church parking. And issue 3 is other parking uses are not accounted for. So on your commentary, maybe we can start there. This is a question to staff. How have you all responded to issue 1 that Melwood is not a community center, it's an office?
So We've been evaluating that in line with the zoning ordinance definitions. So that's where we've been evaluating Melwood as being that institutional use. And again, just kind of falling back to that concern. And that's what we've been using when looking at the parking ratios and parking requirements.
Sorry, could you clarify what you mean by that?
Sorry, again, just trying to emphasize that for the zoning ordinance, like we've been looking at it as the institutional use. We don't want to conflate it as being a different use. That's what it's meeting for review purposes.
So it goes a level higher beyond community center and office, and it's instead philanthropic, I butchered that word, institution? Okay.
Correct.
And what are the required parking ratios for that from a zoning perspective?
So I don't remember what it is for office off the top of my head, but for institutional use, it's 1 space per 3 seats. So like seats being like people to be served. And that for this site comes down to the 20 parking spaces.
Okay, so there will be 60 seats?
Correct.
Okay. Melwood is, let me phrase my question correctly, and this might be more a question for the applicant and not for staff, but with the new space, how many staff members and the community you serve, or not community, how many staff members and clients will be in the space on a weekday basis or whenever you guys are open?
So first, let me clarify that a community service use is a defined term in the zoning ordinance, and it squarely fits what Melwood is, a philanthropic use. When you start to look at parking ratios and what parking ratios should apply, there is no specific parking ratio for a community service use. Therefore, staff goes to the use that's most like the proposed use, and that's how we landed on the institutional use for the parking requirement. So in Melwood today, there are 10 staff and about 50 program participants. And so they average about 30 participants and 8 to 10 staff. In the future, there will be no more than 60 participants and staff on site at any given time. So once again, that can vary based on who's coming in and out of the program, because they have day programs where sometimes they come into the building and leave. So the population they serve is greater than that, but they don't expect any more than 60 on site at any given time.
Okay, I think I've heard 2 things with what you said. You said they don't expect more than 60, but then earlier
It could be
you
20, it could be 40.
I understand that. Earlier you had said there absolutely won't be more than 60. What precautions are you putting into place to ensure that there absolutely will not be more than 60?
I don't believe I said that there absolutely would not be more than 60, and I hope I didn't say that. What I said is we don't anticipate more than 60 participants and staff on site at any given time.
Okay. What precautions will you be doing to ensure that that number is set and we won't be going above the 60-person threshold?
We hadn't planned on that. We hadn't thought about that.
Okay.
It's based on the number of seats. I guess if you assume everyone's sitting in a seat at any given time, we just know that how the building operates today, we just don't anticipate that to be a problem. And we think that the 20 spaces that are being provided are more than enough to serve Melwood's visitors, their employees, and their patrons.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have 3 separate adoptions to go through. So do we want to tackle the first one, which is the general land use plan, and then we'll go one by one through them. I think each one is probably unique enough that we need to do separate votes for each. So I think as long as everybody is on board for that, we can start with that. Any further comments before I move for that first motion?
I think I would just like to get confirmation from staff that the other 2 issues have been addressed. So the existing church parking and the other parking uses not accounted for. How have you all addressed that.
So I'm probably not going to offer anything different than what the applicant said, that when staff is reviewing this, we're looking at the proposed use. Any agreement that they have with with their neighbors, that's a separate private agreement between them, and we're not going to try to get involved in those separate agreements.
I agree with you. I don't think that it is the responsibility of, as we've talked about, a private institution to be required to provide parking. So.
Any further comments? But Commissioner Ludlow.
Yeah, so it seems like the neighborhood is clearly hosting both religious institutions and the Melwood facility that are providing benefit to the entire community, to the county, and so they are burdened in the sense of and Commissioner Flores, you live there. I think you may have a better understanding and sense than I do, but I don't feel fully satisfied that maybe we've addressed the community concerns. I'm a little bit more clear on parking. The other question I have is just on kind of the scale and compatibility of the facility within the neighborhood. And the question I would ask for staff is, are there other examples where Arlington has made zoning or land use changes that have allowed for a similar facility to be scaled in a similar fashion to this one, or is this the first time? Just trying to get a comparable here. That's all. And I will preface that I do understand that in Arlington, our zoning code does allow for great disparities sometimes between the scale and size of homes. Don't have to look too far to see giant new home next to tiny old home. So that happens. I understand. But just looking for an example and maybe some thought that's been put into that.
Well, we can probably get back to you in terms of specific examples. One starting point for that could be the history of special general land use plan studies that have happened since 2008 when that policy was introduced. And really the policy speaks to looking at specific sites where the property owner is envisioning doing something different than what the historical documents may have permitted, particularly in areas that were not planned previously. So areas where we have not convened the community and other commissions to study what else could be appropriate beyond and above what's there today. And that was the big question that we asked in 2023 and 2024 when the special glove study took place. And in that process, hearing from a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different factors were considered beyond just the proposal that's in front of us, but really the location along 23rd Street, where you have current transit access and proximity to other areas where development is already occurring, but also looking at the context, other institutional uses in the area. And I think a lot of the recommendations and guiding principles that came out of that study really set the stage for how those same stakeholders would then review this proposal during the SPRC. Somewhere I think we're absolute in terms of height and setbacks, in terms of measuring stories. Others were more general because we needed to see and have some flexibility in how the responses from the applicant might reflect those. And I think as you've seen on multiple occasions throughout the last or second half of last year, the proposal has evolved each time feedback was received. And I think we're in a much better place than where they started from.
Would the sunrise on North Glebe be similar to this? There was a change, a special GLUP, a change in the GLUP from, I think, public to a different category, increased bulk in a single family neighborhood. I think that was pretty much similar to what we're dealing with here with Millwood.
Yeah, I think they ended up with 4 stories maybe.
Right, but it went up more and was larger. Correct. I mean, the reason they were doing it was to expand that.
Right.
All right, thank you.
All right. Any further discussion before we go to, again, this is the first of just 3 separate motions that we're going to have on the site plan. Yes, Commissioner Locker.
So just because we're going through talking about the GLUP, could you, I'm looking at page 10 in the board report. And basically what the change is going to be is it's going from park, like right now it's shown as park and it's surrounded by yellow with some green. And could you explain what the yellow currently is? And now it's going to be the change is to public, to low, medium residential. So just again, wanting to the significance of the change, because when you're looking at it, one could say if we were changing it to the similar yellow, then I can see why there's some strife here, because if one were to look at it, they were, okay, this was going to be a park, or it's going to be whatever is shown here, not thinking that, moving forward, it was going to turn into something that may be of a larger scale. So that being said, I do want to say that I'm very supportive of this project. I just want to make sure that, we have ample conversation and understanding of why there is, why the neighborhood may feel like this was I don't want to say switch and bait, but that kind of thing where it's like, well, we thought it was going to be green or at least yellow, and now you're really making it a higher, a low to medium residential, rather than, I don't know what a yellow is.
That'd be the low residential. So just again, just confirming that you're reading this correctly, it would be low medium, so a little bit denser. But as my colleague just said, this isn't unheard of for Arlington. We do have areas where there is dense development, and we do assess whether or not it makes sense. And like thinking back to the context of what we're looking at tonight, thinking about the public infrastructure, the transportation impacts, there was the MMTA staff and the applicant team did work together to figure out what are the existing traffic conditions, what is the forecasted traffic conditions, can the neighborhood handle it? And we concluded that it would be sufficient.
Commissioner Mendelson.
Yeah, I just want to ask a real quick question regarding the current usage, I suppose, percentage of nearby residential street parking spaces. To just kind of go back again to that Sunday peak period, church usage time, just to see how much leftover capacity really is there at the current moment. And if you don't have those exact numbers for me at this time, that's perfectly okay. But I just kind of want to get a sense of what the immediate after effects would be. That's all.
Hold on one second. We're going
One
to
moment, I'm
the
looking back
numbers.
at some parking numbers that we did. So one thing that we looked at was there are about, I think it's 3 spaces kind of directly adjacent to the site on the opposite side of 23rd that are part of the parking pilot program, or that are metered. And so you can actually kind of see the historical usage of those spaces. So that shows some element of the usage. On Sunday, I think that showed that at least some of those spaces along the site frontage were about 80% occupied on Sunday around at noon. And then we did some observations of our own on Sundays. Not all of the spaces were occupied, and many of them were on Sundays, as you would expect with the church services. But there were a handful of spaces on 23rd Street, and even on South Grant, there were a couple of spaces that were still available on Sunday, and that was during the church service.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Further comments before we move to the first motion? Okay. I'm going to move to adopt the attached resolution to approve the general land use plan amendment to change the designation from public to low medium residential for the northeast portion of the block bounded by 23rd Street South, South Grant Street, South Hayes Street, and 24th Street South, to include parcel A, excluding parcel B, which is and shall remain envisioned as a portion of Nellie Custis Park. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion. All right. Moving to vote, we start with Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Flores.
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Walker.
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Mendelson.
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Theo.
Aye.
And I too will vote aye. 10-0 for that vote. The next motion is specifically around the ordinance to rezone the property. This is moving it from a C1, which I will say the specific words to this in a minute, and R6 to an R8, or RA8-18, which is a multi-family dwelling district. Before we go to an official motion with that, do we want any discussion or questions to the applicant or to staff on this specific rezoning?
I just had one question there. So with this rezone, this is where any of the scaling changes would be embodied or enabled.
So partially, but I think a lot of your questions would be more tied to the site plan. That's the part where a lot of those questions are coming up.
Okay.
I'll ask a follow-up question to that. What's the height limitation on a C1 local commercial district versus the RA 8-18?
I actually do not know that off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that'd be
I guess maybe the main question, not to get the specific number, but is the building that is proposed, would the height be consistent inside of a C1 designation? And maybe this is also an opportunity to just hear, is there a rationale for why we're rezoning it? Is it just to make this consistent with a single designation, or is there another rationale for the rezoning?
C1 doesn't allow residential.
Yeah, makes sense.
And this is taller than what C1 would allow. But you have to remember, we went through a general land use plan study, which was a community process, and that resulted in principles that endorse the zoning that we're seeking and the height and the mass and scale of the building that we've proposed.
Got it. No, thank you for clarifying that. Other questions from commissioners? Okay. Commissioner Flores. Yep, absolutely.
I'm trying to find the height for C-1. I've not found it yet.
Is it what?
In our zoning code?
It's 35 feet.
Thank you. Thank you. So that zoning height is 35 feet. The maximum height for an RA 8-18 multifamily is 40 feet with a maximum of 4 stories.
Except that with the affordable housing, we can go to the 60.
Yeah, I'm stating the zoning specifications.
And with the affordable designation, the allowable height, is that the maximum that you are seeking under the code? Okay, thank you. Other comments before proposing the motion? Okay, I move to adopt the attached ordinance to rezone the property located at 750 23rd Street South from C1 Local Commercial District and R6 One Family Dwelling District to RA 8-18, a multiple family dwelling district. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion before moving to vote? All right. Commissioner Coleman?
Aye.
Commissioner Flores?
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein?
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Aye.
Commissioner Locker?
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow?
Aye.
Commissioner Mendelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon?
Aye. Aye.
Commissioner Theo?
Aye.
I too will vote aye. Saying 10-0. For the third one, I think what I'll do is I'm just going to say it and then we can have the discussion. So we're not breaking it into 2 parts. So I'll motion to adopt the attached ordinance for SPL N 24-00002 to permit the construction of a 5-story mixed-use building with approximately 131,736 square feet of residential and 17,033 square feet of institutional for modifications for additional density, reduced residential parking ratio, density exclusions, and other modifications necessary to achieve the proposed development located at 750 23rd Street South, subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance. Any discussion on that motion? Is it seconded?
Second.
Any discussion? No. Okay. Commissioner Coleman,
Aye.
Commissioner Flores,
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein,
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi,
Aye.
Commissioner Locker,
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow,
Aye.
Commissioner Mendelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon,
Aye.
Commissioner Theo.
Aye.
I too will vote aye. All right. Thank you both, staff and applicants, and for the public for their input. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the official part of the meeting, I suppose, but we still have one official item, so it's not the official part of the meeting. Anyway, we need to vote on our calendar. We have a draft one. Some people came in after. Did you all get, okay. There are some additional copies there if anyone needs one, but we need to talk about there are some few dates that need to be modified, and Meg, I did see your email if you want to speak more to that.
Yeah, of course. So at our last meeting, we discussed a flaw in last year's calendar that we were able to meet after the budget process. And so I'd like to edit the calendar I'd like to open up the conversation of possibly editing the calendar to move the meeting that we will have later this month on the 27th to the week after the budget hearing on the 25th. So either between on any date between March 26th and the last day in March, the 31st, because I want to ensure that we're able to come back together to talk through the changes in the budget. I think we weren't able to do that last year, and that ended up resulting in Chairman Slatt having to speak on all of our behalf, and I would have liked to be able to have input.
I would like to add one thing with that suggestion, and that is that if we move that meeting, we will miss an opportunity for you all to meet prior to the March 15th County Board meeting. And I'd like to recommend, if you would like to do that, that we add an additional meeting, and it can be virtual to the schedule.
We can do that?
Sure. You can meet as much as you want.
Do you guys want to hang out one more time?
Well, yeah, we haven't normally made use of the second virtual meeting that we have. So would it make more sense to have that virtual meeting take place before the budget meeting? That's less likely to have a lot of agenda items versus the regular county board meeting might have a lot of things for us to consider and have presentations from staff and applicants.
Jim, I have a question for you on this. So we typically meet prior to Planning Commission. Does what happened here inform how you all make decisions before you go to the board? I mean, I know that's been the pattern, but if we move away from that, is that acceptable? I want to make sure I know that before I answer the question. That was for you. Do you know?
For you,
Jim. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm like
Facing. Yeah, I'm totally, could you do that again? I'm
No,
totally spaced
I
out.
was only asking, so he was asking, should we have the meeting before the county board meeting?
Yeah,
And so my question to you was, if we do that, it's fine, but it would be after PC prior to county board where the dates line up.
but this would be a special meeting,
It would
just,
be a special meeting.
I don't think it matters for planning commission purposes.
Okay.
So we wouldn't change the meetings that we have. We'd keep
Right,
the
we'd add
February
one.
27th, but we would add a meeting between the 25th and the 31st.
Of March, right?
which means we'd have 12 this year.
Yep.
which would, there likely wouldn't be any votes. So if we don't make quorum, I think I'm okay with that. I would just like an opportunity to review the budget.
Yeah, and that's a good point is,
So it doesn't even have to be a virtual one. Because
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if we have a
doesn't
quorum.
matter, right?
Mhm.
Exactly. We wouldn't even have to declare it as one of the virtual ones. You could
Yeah.
just have it be,
Yeah.
you just
That's
show up.
true.
Does it still need to be public?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
because we have more than two of us getting
there's
together,
enough
so
there.
yeah, it's all
Absolutely.
publicly announced.
Absolutely.
So the week of somewhere between the 25th and the 30th is a Sunday. So the 27th, if we're just doing this virtually, do we want to keep the regular cadence of it being a Thursday? That makes sense to
We
everybody.
just have to check and see if
There
there's any
is a
SPRCs.
faculty hearing meeting on that day. I don't know
Yep.
if that matters for any of you, but, and it
yeah.
probably won't be in this room, which is okay. Okay.
That's a good point is, yeah, if for any reason someone was going to participate in the tax rate hearing, it is that same night. Yeah.
I, for one, am open to other nights of the,
Mhm.
Okay.
since
That's
I have
fair.
classes on Thursday, so it could be kind of a
That's fair,
crunch.
too. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just be aware there could be something like an SPRC or an LRPC scheduled that night. There's nothing
Yeah.
now,
Mhm.
Right. But there
but
could
that's
be.
not unusual.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So sounds like the options are Wednesday, the 26th,
Mhm.
Thursday, the 27th. I will say Friday, the 28th, but fully recognize we may not choose that. And Monday, the 31st. My choice would be Monday, the 31st.
I will not be able to be there because I will be on an airplane.
Unacceptable, change your plans.
Sorry, the other date was Wednesday, the 26th, you said?
Yeah, those sound like the best two.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
I can do Wednesday.
Does general consensus around Wednesday, the 26th work for most folks?
It does for me, yes.
It's good for me. Yeah.
So that's Wednesday, February the 20th.
Nope, Wednesday, March 26th.
Oh, gosh, I'm all turned around. No conflicts for me. No, we can do it.
I didn't
I
expect to come out of
cannot
it
do that.
adding another meeting, so my bad.
Yeah.
That's fine for the 26th. I just can't, I have a board meeting. I can't do that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's okay, I didn't want you there anyway.
Good.
So
Are we still live?
We are. It being virtual, I think that that especially allows for it to be flexible, and that's acceptable. So, okay. So we'll add that.
okay.
Are there any other concerns around any of the other dates that are proposed that anyone wants to discuss?
Wait, so so we would have this as a virtual meeting or?
No, we'll be adding, so in addition to what's already on the calendar, we would be
Yeah.
adding a Wednesday, March 26th virtual meeting that will be specifically for the purpose of talking about the budget. We will likely not vote on anything.
Okay.
We don't make quorum. That's okay.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool. Great.
Yeah, I would definitely wear the June 30th rather than Thursday, July 3rd. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the,
Yep.
we get 3-day weekend this
If it's
year.
July 3rd, then yeah, I won't make it. So I'm sure that others won't make it.
Also, what flexibility is there for that November 24th? I know
Yeah.
that normally it's the 27th, which would be Thanksgiving. That's a no-go.
Yeah.
Any other additional flexibility around that? Since I know a lot of people, including maybe myself this year, may be taking that entire week for travel.
Yeah, I'd love to move it to the Thursday before if we
The
could.
20th.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that work for everyone? I think
Yeah,
that works
definitely-
for me.
definitely support
20th.
that.
Okay. So maybe we change, okay, so the November 24th date would instead be the 20th. Any other dates that stand out to anyone? And I think that'll be our regular virtual meeting anyway, right? So even with it being the week before, I don't think we'll expect folks to.
Just to go back to the other meeting that we're adding. So us adding the Wednesday, the 26th meeting, does that count as our second virtual meeting?
So do we need to declare that if we don't expect a vote?
So you all have, if as long as it's a public meeting, then it's considered a meeting that counts. And this will be your 13th, 12th or 13th meeting?
12th meeting,
12th.
12th. Is
So
it-
you are allowed four virtual.
Oh, I thought we were allowed 2.
It was 2 last year. We changed the rules in July and we voted on the
lovely.
new policy.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Uh,
All right.
let me just confirm. I believe it's let me go to the policy just to be sure. I'm all mixed up. I'm looking at my February calendar, which is a Wednesday, just like March, and now I'm doing this. So just hang on. I want to be sure this time.
Yeah. And I think if that is the case, that there's 4, I'll defer to Chair Maradovic when he's back to maybe think through, do we want to exercise that in advance with purpose on any of these? Because I think we were somewhat keeping it in the back pocket for, we need to declare it quickly, but that doesn't really work. We can't change the format last minute if we realize we're not having a quorum. We need it 2 weeks ahead of time. So I think it probably just works better for us to just figure out ahead of time, which ones are we doing
Thursday,
virtual?
July 3rd, you'd know you wouldn't have a quorum.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So the new policy says, 50% of the 2 times per calendar year, or 50% rounded up to the next whole number. And you cannot have 2 all virtual meetings in a row. So it's actually more than 4. It's
Could it
up
be
to
6? Yeah.
And this is two.
Right? Because we had 12 or 11.
Well, we have 12 if we add this March 26th, so then it would turn into 6.
I want to read this again. It says, the commission does not convene an all virtual public meeting more than 2 times per calendar year, or 50% of the meetings held per calendar year rounded up to the next whole number. So that would be 12, right? And
Yes.
50% of that would be 6.
6. Yep. So yeah, I would understand that to be 6.
Or consecutively with another all virtual public meeting. So you cannot have 2 public meetings in a row.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah.
Full public meetings. in a
Yeah.
row.
So we would need to start being deliberate and planning out, if we were going to do virtual the 26th, then you do May, then you do August. So we probably wouldn't get to the 6th if we were to proceed that way. Although we could preemptively declare the February 27th meeting to be a virtual one, because that would make it every other, with the March 13th one then being in person,
Yeah.
26th virtual, 24th of April in person, and so on.
So it's almost like
Is
you
the
could do every other.
language like 2 or 6, 6 being the maximum, or 2 or 6, 6 being 2 being the minimum?
It says,
Or-
does not convene an all virtual public meeting more than 2 times per calendar year, or 50% of the meetings held per calendar year rounded up to the next whole number.
Okay.
That second part is probably not necessarily for us. It's probably for commissions that meet
Very
fewer
Okay.
than 12
Thank you.
times per year.
Right. It might be, groups that meet like only 4.
Or
well, I guess
twice. If they meet
only
twice a year,
they can't declare
You
both.
can't
of
do
them
it
virtual.
twice. Yeah. Okay.
I guess they could, because they're allowed to do it twice. Anyway, point being, they can't be consecutive. So we probably have 2 things we need to, I guess we need to discuss. Do we want to preemptively make the next meeting virtual and follow that pattern for the course of the year with this new found understanding of the requirements?
Staggered though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So am I understanding that the way other people are though? Just because it sounds like 2 might be the most, but then it sounds like 6 might be the most.
It seems
Yeah.
to me, at least understanding that language with it saying or, it's the 2 language is specific to groups that aren't meeting very frequently. For groups that are meeting more frequently, the 50% rounded up to the whole number is the rule that would apply.
Well, we could do the March 13th meeting virtual and have it when we normally would have it on the 20th, because it could be virtual. Because the reason we can't do it on the 20th is that the boardroom's being used. But if we are virtual, it's irrelevant.
That's
Would,
right.
would that serve the purpose then of, no, it's still, yeah, because.
No, we
Before the meeting, the
Yeah, we
budget
still
hearing.
have to have the other meeting because we talked about that last time, and March 20th is before the budget hearing, which is March 25th. So I'd
doesn't
still
help
like
that.
to come
Yeah,
back.
there'd still be a
Could
need
do it
to
virtually and
reconvene.
just stick to our usual schedule.
Yeah, we
Just throwing
could.
that out.
No, we could, but if we did that, then we'd have to do a non-virtual one the following meeting, which is the one that we're expecting will be the less or less agenda heavy meeting. It'll be the one that we don't need to vote on. So that's probably the better.
But we
one to do
also don't
virtually.
have to have all 6.
No, we don't. We don't have to have them all be virtual. That's absolutely.
And I'll just say, for now, perhaps we be conservative on assigning virtual meetings just until we have full understanding and
Of what this is, and I can
confirmation
follow
what
up,
that
yeah.
language
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
It would
I can
suck
follow.
to go ahead and knock out 2 virtual meetings and then be told, oh, well, actually, you've already used up your 2 for the year.
Yeah.
Your memories are,
Yep.
incorrect.
Although it doesn't stipulate if the commission meets less than X number of times per
Yeah.
year.
Right.
It's just
It's
one of
not
the-
very clear.
Yeah.
Like, I need to get my oil changed in my car, and apparently the rule there is you have to hit X number of miles or X number of months, and whichever comes sooner, that's the one
exactly.
Right.
And I would expect to see that kind of language
Yeah.
to clarify it.
I'll follow up with Sarah, just to be clear on that.
Side note,
All right. So
I still haven't.
So
gotten it.
to that end, and with caution, we maybe don't preemptively declare virtual meetings other than the one we are talking about for March 26th. But we'll listen to further guidance on the rest of it. So I'm going to move to adopt the proposed 2025 calendar for the Transportation Commission as outlined in the printed copies before us, with the additional change of an added meeting for Wednesday, March 26th, which will be virtual, and an adjustment of the November 24th meeting to be changed to November 20th.
Thursday, November 20th, right? Okay.
Seconded.
And that is a virtual meeting
Seconded.
too, correct?
Okay. Do I have unanimous consent for adopting it?
That was a.
Oh, yes.
So Meg, you seconded, right? Okay, and did you say that was a virtual meeting, the November 20th meeting?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's
Oh.
normally what we do, is we make the November one
Okay.
virtual, right? So I think we could say, if we're only allowed 2, then we'll do March 26th and November 2nd. We can reevaluate if it's more than that.
Okay.
Okay, everyone's good.
Yep.
All right. And I think that all that leaves us with is any updates from SPRCs or other groups that folks want to share. I'm going to quickly just say Arlington's transportation future. There's not a ton that I'd share on that front. The process is continuing. There'll be more opportunities for public outreach, and we'll share with you all more opportunities for engaging with that. Both Commissioner Shannon and myself have been able to go to those meetings, and I don't think I'm missing anything we need to ask the group unless there's anything you want to add.
No, nothing.
No. Any,
That we're the only ones that follow the instructions.
we really were. Yeah, I'm going to pat ourselves on the back for that. So we did a good job. Okay, any updates from SPRCs or any other points of order? Yes.
I was on the River House SPRC. It was pretty good. I think the proposed changes, the proposed project is good. I didn't see any kind of issues, but I think this was also pretty general. So I think the next SPRC will have like more conversations about the transportation element. So I think in the following meeting, that update afterwards will be a bit more substantial. I think the only concern was just some density concerns from folks in the Arlington Ridge community.
Okay.
And I was also on the Transit Advisory Committee meeting in January. Again, pretty straightforward. They gave like an update on ART and star ridership metrics, an update on the Pentagon City second elevator, which is adding an elevator to southwest corner of South Hayes and 12th Street, and then some updates on the WMATA budget. And that was about it.
All right.
So pretty good.
Thank you, Commissioner Hussein. Anyone else with updates? Yes, Commissioner Thiel.
Yes, on Vision Zero, there's just a couple of feedback opportunities closing up in the next few days. By Sunday, February 8th, there is the Tactical Bus Platform Safety Pilot feedback that is open. And also the South Glebe Road and Old Glebe Road involving that tactical bus platform safety pilot. So I'll send out a link if anybody wants to submit some feedback for that next couple of days.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Flores.
I attended the second Hotel Pentagon SBRC. This is the site that is formerly a hotel for both Hotel Pentagon, which is not occupied anymore, but Comfort in Pentagon City. It is on Glebe Road and 24th Street. This SPRC meeting was all about transportation. I'm incredibly concerned about the load of traffic that already exists on 24th Street. So if you're ever traveling there during peak commute times, there's almost always a backup, kind of the entirety essentially of 24th Street south going from Shirlington Road towards Glebe Road. It's already kind of a mess. And they're looking at adding over 100 units. And I don't know that I wouldn't say it is at the responsibility of the applicant to resolve the issues, the load, and it will provide much needed housing for residents in this area at market rate. So no affordability, but still housing is in such a huge need. But at the same time, that street is already like actively backed up, and it can take you upwards of 8 to 10 minutes just to get through that one segment of street. I'm really concerned about that, and I don't really know where we can go from here.
Yeah, I was on that too, but I also kept in mind that that hotel was a motor hotel. So it was generating traffic already. Now it's closed, but it did have a significant amount of traffic that it was generating anyway. So I'm not sure what the incremental increase would be from this particular thing. And it's more likely that people are going to be staying home and working rather than at the hotel. People don't stay in a hotel and work. They were staying there to go somewhere. So it might actually generate less traffic, even if more people are on site. I'm speculating. I don't have anything to back this up.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just sort of,
Fair.
that's how I was viewing
Yeah.
the site as if it has more, it's an incrementally more rather than all of a sudden dumping stuff that wasn't there before.
Yeah, and Hotel Pentagon already has the issue and the Comfort Inn that's there right now, where the entrances to the hotel are on Glebe. And so if you're turning into the hotel and you're going towards Boston on Glebe, you have to make a left turn in the middle of very heavy flow of traffic right off of the interstate. And if you're going the other way, you do that flash break and then turn in because you almost miss it. So they're removing that entrance and exit portion, but they're putting it all on 24th Street, which means people that are going towards Shirlington or out towards Bailey's Crossroads will have to make a left. And people that are coming in from the interstate will have to make a left. And I all
They
of
do
the
that anyway, right now.
well, but all of that traffic is on a larger road. And that's a fair point. They're going to do it now. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I look
It's
at it.
really more like
Yeah.
VDOT should really do something about it.
Right.
It's one part of the county I'm always really glad that I'm normally biking on 4 Mile Run Trail because I have so much more of a direct route between Shirlington and, over towards the Arna Valley and that area versus going up Shirlington Road up to 24th Road. It's a mess. I'm also curious if at some point the redesign of the exit and the circle, the Shirlington circle with 395 will impact that because some of the exit ramps for it are kind of caught up in the Glebe exit
we were
as well.
told that the Glebe Road one is supposed to be re-engineered.
Yeah.
They have no projection of when it'll happen,
Yeah,
other
when
than
that'll ever
it's on the list to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hopefully at some point that helps relieve it. But no, thank you for being on that SPRC.
Sure thing.
Any other updates from anyone?
I'm sorry. I just forgot to mention one thing from the Transit Advisory Committee. Along with the WMATA budget, they also gave some information about DMV Moves, which is an initiative. I don't know if you guys know about it, but it's like a regional vision of thinking about public transit funding in the DC region. So I can send around some information because I think it's a great it's much needed, that conversation of like how we're thinking about not just transit in Arlington, but transit like as a region. And that's a really important thing, especially with like, we have so many jurisdictions and we travel not just within the county, but outside the county as well. So they just provided some really good information about what that initiative is and what it could mean. Yeah.
So, thank you. Anyone else? All right. And I think with that, we can adjourn. Thank you all so much. Oh, Commissioner Theo.
It's just another little Vision Zero thing, just an FYI that the county is doing a high injury network safety audit for Langston Boulevard starting this month.
Excellent. Thank you. And Miss Obukoye, anything else? Yep. So with that, we are adjourned. Yay. You wanna? Yeah. Anything? Good. All right. No,